Credo che possa sembrare strano e particolare che un'associazione come Porta Aperta abbia scelto di sostenere la sessione in cui ci si occupa della giustizia americana. In realtà questo è un tema che credo sia molto interessante anche per la nostra realtà, per una realtà come la nostra che si occupa di marginalità gravi, ma anche di integrazione di persone migranti. Credo che tutti noi abbiamo in mente nei mesi scorsi ad esempio l'omicidio di Floyd, oppure tutto il movimento di Black Lives Matter, come anche ad esempio le aggressioni a persone di origine asiatica in città americane. Tutto questo è a dimostrare che nelle società avanzate sicuramente il tema delle minoranze razziali, ma anche minoranze culturali o linguistiche o di altro tipo, è un tema sicuramente di grande rilevanza. Credo che nella nostra realtà siamo ancora nelle condizioni di poter costruire un futuro che sia diverso, che sia attento a quelle che sono appunto le condizioni delle minoranze, quindi la costruzione di una società plurale. In questo senso il ruolo della giustizia penale è un ruolo fondamentale, con una particolare attenzione appunto alla situazione, alle condizioni di chi è vittima di queste situazioni, e credo che anche nel nostro Paese ci sia bisogno di costruire una cultura diversa, attenta appunto a questo aspetto, e questo ci potrà consentire di costruire una società che davvero sia rispettosa delle situazioni anche di minoranza.
Hello, how are you? Hello. Good morning to you. Here in Italy, we are in afternoon.
And good afternoon to you.
We are here for the Italian Criminal Justice Festival with Professor David Singleton, who I thank you so much for having accepted to take part to this event. It's really important for us, and because today we are facing a short interview. We are dealing with a short interview about George Floyd case. This edition of the festival is about victims. And so during the festival, we are organizing a focus on the criminal justice in the United States, and of course, we want to dedicate a space about this important case that has arrived also here in Italy, had a great impact also in Italy. So, hi David, if you want to shortly introduce yourself, then we can start the interview.
Well, sure. And again, it is my pleasure to be here. And I am David Singleton. I am a professor of law at Northern Kentucky University, Salmon P. Chase College of Law. And I'm also the executive director of the Ohio Justice and Policy Center, which works to make our state and the state of Ohio's criminal legal system better. So that is what I do. I'm a teacher, but I'm also a practicing lawyer.
Okay, perfect. And so I have a list of questions, and we can go through them. And okay, the first one, we know that on last 20 April, former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin was convicted of about complex charges for an Italian audience. So he was convicted of second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter for the death of George Floyd. We know that without doubt, the death of Mr. Floyd spurred the largest civil rights protests in decades. And so I would like to know, in your opinion, why this case, amongst the others, can be considered a turning point in American racial politics, and what might be the impact of this trial?
Well, I think that part of the reason why George Floyd's murder is a turning point of sorts is because of that 9 minutes and 29 seconds that showed his life being snuffed out by a police officer who just didn't care, and 3 other police officers who stood by and let it happen. It was so gut-wrenching and painful to watch. There was no way that people could watch that and not be deeply impacted. And I think that was the straw that broke the camel's back, is the saying that we have here. It was just too much for people to ignore, and it really raised questions that have been asked for a long time about the role of race and racism in the way that the police treat people who are Black and brown, and it was the last straw, and people could not turn away and ignore it. And that is why, as you mentioned, these were the largest protests in decades. And it wasn't just Black people protesting, it was Black and white people protesting, it was people across the political spectrum protesting, because it was just too much to watch and to see, and something needed to be done. So in terms of whether or not it is a real turning point, it's an open question. I don't know the answer to that yet, and we will see.
Okay, so the reason why do you feel the reason why this particular case got so much media attention? Maybe we can say that a lot of this is about the videotape, the fact that people saw actually what happened.
I think that Martina, is a huge reason, is that people could see it with their own eyes. You didn't have to just rely on George Floyd's family saying this awful thing happened. We saw it. We saw the whole thing, and there was no dispute about what happened. So I think that was a really big reason why the case got so much attention.
But are there others trial against police officers? I mean, how often police officers are under trial for this kind of episodes?
How often?
Yeah,
not enough. To be honest. I mean, I think that part of the problem is that police misconduct is swept under the rug. One of the reasons is what we call that thin blue line, and that may not be a term that is familiar to Italians, but basically what it means is that officers protect each other's back. Whether or not it is a real turning point. And often the prosecutors don't really push for other officers to be charged. And so very, very often police officers don't face accountability when they do the sorts of things that George Floyd did. I mean, I'm sorry, that Derek Chauvin did to George Floyd.
Okay. No, yes, in Italy is different because criminal action is compulsory. So there is no way that something like this happened, and at least the criminal investigation starts. I mean, For you, it is different, I think, that because prosecutors can choose to not investigate this kind of, even when someone dies.
That is, I mean, prosecutors can choose. I mean, usually there'll be an investigation, but they can basically decide whether charges are going to be brought. I mean, we have a saying here that prosecutors can convince a grand jury to charge a ham sandwich, meaning that they can get charges when they want to for just about anything. But when it comes to police officers, often the prosecutors are not aggressive in pushing for police officers to be charged.
Okay. I was shocked to learn that about 20 minutes before the guilty verdict in Derek Chauvin trial was announced, a black teenage girl was shot and killed by the police in Columbus, Ohio, actually your state. And how do you think, maybe this is a difficult question, but how do you think it is possible that still today, in 2021, we assist so many cases of macroscopic violence against black people? And which are the main causes? I mean, it is really an issue related only to racism?
I think race plays a huge part in it. And that's why when I was talking about answering your first question about whether we are at a turning point, I think that's debatable. I'm not sure. I mean, I think George Floyd's murder turned out a lot of people in the streets who were demanding accountability, but it certainly has not stopped other police shootings. There have been several more since the Chauvin verdict. And I think that we have in the United States of America a deep, deep problem of racism. Our country, I mean, listen, I'm just going to be blunt. Our country was founded on racism. And we have never come to grips with it fully. It infects all of our institutions, including our justice system. And until we reckon with it, the problem of race, we are never going to get where we need to be when it comes to police violence, particularly police violence against Black and brown people. It is just a fact. Our lives don't matter as much. Of course, they should, but they don't. And that is because of racism in the United States of America. It's
crazy.
It really is.
Yeah, indeed. Turning to more technical and procedural questions, if I may. Were there any problems with the composition of the jury? And how do you reckon the makeup of the jury has affected the trial at hand?
I think that the jury composition was unusual in one important respect. There were 4 African Americans on the jury, 4 Black people out of the 12, and that means a third of the jury was Black, and that's compared to the population of the Hennepin County population, where Minneapolis is. It's about it's less than 20%. So Black folk actually were slightly overrepresented in terms of their population on the jury as compared to the population in the county, which I think is a good thing, because in far too many cases, prosecutors, particularly where in the rare cases where police officers are charged, prosecutors often try and keep Black people off of juries because they believe that they're going to be more likely to convict a police officer. So I think actually the jury composition was appropriate and good. It was good to see more diversity on this jury. than normally occurs. And it is a problem in places across the United States that Black and brown people are underrepresented on juries. They never get summoned to come and serve. They never get asked to come and serve on juries. And because of that, jury makeup is disproportionately made up of white people. And it's not to say that white people cannot be fair, but we need, our jury system, the whole idea of it is that you want to have a fair cross-section of the community that's representative. And if you are excluding people based on race or just never including them into the process, you're not going to get fair jury verdicts.
Okay, yes, it's true. The trial started on 29 March and it lasted less than 1 month. Are trials normally this short in the United States? Because for Italian lawyer, as I am, it is something crazy to imagine, because in Italy, criminal trials last years. I'm not kidding. So
years. Oh my goodness. That's very different.
Yeah.
No, it's very different here. Most jury trials in criminal cases are going to be shorter, actually, than what you saw in the Chauvin trial. Now, can there be long trials that last many months? Yes. Years, that would basically be unheard of here. Months, that can happen if we're talking about a really complicated case. But most jury trials in the United States, they may be, days. You can have some trials that are days long. There's some trials that may not even be days long. They may be a day long. There may be some trials that go a week, 2 weeks, a month. So, in some cases longer than that. But shorter trials. I mean, we have much shorter trials than it sounds like you have in Italy.
And was during the trial, was Mr. Chauvin in pretrial detention? Was in jail while facing the trial or not? Or he was?
Yeah, he was free. He was initially held, and then he made bond, and then he was free. But then once he got convicted, he was sent to prison to await sentencing.
Okay. And I mean, I believe that now we are speaking about the video, but I was wondering if there were other evidence brought to trial. I mean, what was the most significant evidence in the trial? Of course, the videos, but there were any issues about, medical condition of George Floyd or witness statements, which were the main evidence during the trial?
The video was the star of the trial from the prosecution standpoint. It spoke for itself. But then I'd say the other really critical witness was the expert that the prosecution called that identified the moment when life literally left George Floyd's body. And I think at that point, 3 more minutes continued with Chauvin's knee in George Floyd's neck. I think that by pretty much every account, that testimony from the expert was really devastating, was really tough for the defense to deal with. And sure, yeah, the defense brought up issues about whether George Floyd had underlying medical issues and maybe he died for some reason unrelated to the knee in his neck. But that really, in my view and in the view of a lot of other people, was just just grasping at straws. They were just trying to come up with something in a very, very, very difficult case for the defense.
And what about the other police officers that they were assisting to the episode, that I believe that they are going to be under trial soon? And did they testify? Were they able to testify or not, because they are co-defendant?
They did not testify, the other three officers. And I mean, I suppose that there's nothing stopping them from testifying. It may not have been in their interest to testify. I mean, if one of them had worked out a deal with the prosecution to testify for the prosecution, you sometimes see that happen. But they did not testify, and good luck to them. They're gonna, it's gonna be tough for them too. They may not get convicted of the same level of charges as Derek Chauvin, but they stood by and didn't do anything. And it's not going to be easy for them to escape completely without accountability.
Are they facing prison too?
Absolutely, they're facing prison.
So not only, also the other, they are facing prison, possibly.
The other officers are definitely facing prison if they get convicted.
Okay. And it is my understanding that in jury trials now, recently, there is for a verdict to convict a defendant of a serious offense, there is the necessity of the unanimous jury verdict. Is this principle put in practice, and how difficult it can be to achieve unanimity? I mean, in George Floyd trial, they reached the unanimity, if I understand correctly. But how is this difficult?
The one thing I wanted to say, just before I talk about how difficult or not difficult it is that in almost every state in the United States before the Supreme Court decision recently in the Ramos case that you're referring to, almost every state required unanimous verdicts. So that new case didn't change much. But it said that it's no longer acceptable for any state to have less than unanimous verdicts in a serious case. So in our experience, it's going to depend on the individual case. There are jury trials every day in criminal cases involving serious cases where the jury reaches a unanimous decision. It's either to convict on some or all of the charges, or it is to find the person not guilty. And when the jury cannot agree, when they are deadlocked, when there's no unanimity, then a mistrial is declared, and either the prosecution can try the case again, or it can elect not to try the case. But I think in practice, juries are pretty good at getting to unanimity. It may take them some time to get there, but it happens, frequently. I would say that is the norm, that they reach a decision.
And which are serious cases? I mean, only murder case, or also rape or robbery? I don't know.
Any really, for the way that we think of a serious case is where you can go to prison. So it could be a serious. It could be a financial crime. It could be embezzlement. It could be
facing prison. So we can say that now in the United States, in order to go to prison, to go to jail, you need to be reached by a conviction issued by the the totality of jurors?
But unanimous. They got to be unanimous.
Yeah.
That is right.
Otherwise, you are acquitted.
Otherwise, there's a mistrial.
Okay.
Let's say that we've got a jury of 12, and you've got 7 who are voting for conviction and 5 who are saying not guilty. If they cannot get past their disagreement, then the judge will say, all right, I'm declaring a mistrial. We also call that here a hung jury. So the jury's hung, there's a mistrial, and at that point, either the prosecutor can retry the case and do it again, or they can just dismiss it at that point.
Okay.
But that's not an acquittal. That's not the same thing as finding the person not guilty.
Okay.
And the reason why that matters is if the person is found not guilty by unanimous vote, then we have rules here that say that the prosecution can never try the case again. Once you have been found not guilty, that's it. You can't.
The double jeopardy. Yeah. Yes. The double. Yeah. Yeah. Coming back to Floyd case, we know that Derek Chauvin now will be sentenced on June 25, if I remember correctly. And in the meantime, he was taken to a state prison to await sentencing. And technically, Chauvin could face up to 40 years in prison. Is it correct?
That's correct.
And I mean, in your opinion, on which factors the sentence will depend? Also considering that he has no prior criminal records. How this sentencing decision go usually?
Well, the judge is going to look at all of the factors. The judge is going to look at the nature and seriousness of the crime. The judge is going to look at the fact that Derek Chauvin didn't have a previous criminal record, and he was a law enforcement officer and had served the community. And we can question whether he was serving it well or not, but there's no doubt that he was a police officer, and putting himself in harm's way as part of his work. I think the judge is going to consider all of that. I think the reason why I would be worried if I was Derek Chauvin is because this case had just touched off a firestorm of public opinion. And most of that public opinion is not in Derek Chauvin's favor. And so could that influence the judge's sense of what is just in this case? It's possible. According to Minnesota sentencing guidelines, Derek Chauvin should be falling, I believe it's in the 12.5-year range for a sentence, given his absence of a record.
Okay.
But I would not be surprised if the judge gives Chauvin more time than that to make an example out of him. And whether or not that's the right thing to do is really not my call. I don't have a vote in it, but I do think that there's some chance that he's going to get significantly more than 12.5 years. Is it possible he could get less time? Sure, it's possible. Okay. But we will see what happens.
Yeah, but will this decision about sentence, the concrete punishment, we will ever know the reasons why the judge will decide to issue the specific conviction. There are written arguments about this or not. We will never know how the judge will reason about this.
I expect that the judge, what we will know is what the judge will say. I expect that the judge will make some remarks when he sentences Derek Chauvin. Now, is the judge going to say that he was influenced by public opinion? Probably not. That's something that I don't think you can erase from possibility. But the judge will certainly give some reasons why he is giving whatever sentence he's going to give. And so that's what we'll have.
But he's going to do so, I mean, to the public opinion, he's going to deliver a kind of a press release, or there is a kind of obligation to write down why you are convicting a person to serve 12 years in prison.
The judge will say it when he sentences. He'll say it orally when he sentences Derek Chauvin. And that is typically what happens in sentences across the United States, and those are, by the way, decisions that are largely they can vary from state to state here, but in every state I'm familiar with, the judge will explain in open court why he or she is reaching a certain sentence.
Okay, and to conclude, just today, Chauvin legal team have filed court documents alleging misconduct by both prosecutors and jurors and requesting a new trial. Which are the grounds for an appeal? Does he have any chance of obtaining an appeal or seeking a new trial? What about now? I mean,
the new trial motion is going to be denied, and most of the new trial motions focused on arguments that the trial judge already rejected, which was that there was too much publicity in the Minneapolis area and that the case needed to be moved. That's the biggest argument that is made in the new trial motion. And yeah, there's some other arguments that refer to prosecutorial misconduct and juror misconduct, but I don't see that going anywhere in terms of a new trial. Now, there will be an appeal that will be filed, and I think it's too early to say whether there will be grounds for an appeal beyond what we've already talked about here, which is the pretrial publicity and whether he could have gotten a fair trial in Minneapolis. There may be other issues that a lawyer who specializes in appeals can look through the entire record and come up with something. So it's possible that there could be a ground for appeal that could get Derek Chauvin a new trial eventually. It's too early to tell, I think, what that might be. And I expect that he will have lawyers that will fight very hard to try and get him out. And that's a good thing that we have a system here where just because you've done something that is bad and you've been found guilty of it, that you still have lawyers that are going to fight hard for you. And we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens.
Okay. Thank you very much. There is anything that you want to add, or some consideration that you want to add about this case? Something that, yeah.
Well, I don't think there's anything new that I want to say that I haven't already covered, except I just want to come back to we do have a moment in the United States to really look at racism and how it has produced a lot of injustice in our criminal legal system. And I hope that we will be an example to the world in how to come to grips with our past and really truly achieve justice. I'm not sure we're going to get there. I'm not sure we're going to get there. We talk about, a lot of people talk about American exceptionalism. I think that we are exceptional in one way in particular, and that is we are racist. Our institutions are racist here, and I think that we need to be honest about that and not try and sweep that under the rug. And if we can be honest with it, come to grips with it, then maybe we can have a better justice system. Maybe we can have better public safety that doesn't put Black lives at risk in terms of police killings and the like.
Indeed. Hope that this will be, coming back to the first question, I really hope that we can speak about this maybe in next 10 years as a turning point, that from a tragedy something good can come up and in a way change not only the public opinion but also the entire system in a way.
I hope so. That is my hope as well.
We will speak in 10 years and and see how we'll go.
I would love to.
So thank you very much to Professor Singleton. It has been a great honor for us to have you as a speaker in this festival, and I really hope that we will have soon occasion to meet each other in Italy, in Modena squares, and you should come and speak directly to Italian audience.
I would love that. I love your country. I've been there twice, and it's one of my favorite places on the planet. So I would love to come.
Thank you. Thank you very much, David.
Take care now.
Nice day. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
The district attorney said to me, "Is there any question in your mind that this is the man who assaulted you?" And my response was, "There's absolutely no question in my mind." Why didn't an alarm bell go off? This was in Manitowoc, taken right before our 20th class reunion. So that would have been 1987, 2 years after the attack. It was a weekday. Oftentimes in the summer, our 2 children and my husband and I would go to Rivers, Wisconsin, and spend the late afternoon on the beach. I often jogged on that beach. This day was no different. It was a beautiful day. It was probably in the high 70s. I jogged north into Point Beach State Park. Probably had jogged maybe a third of a mile, and there was a man standing with a leather jacket slung over his shoulder. He hollered to me, "Hey, it's a great day." I turned and glanced at him and said, "Yeah, it's a great day for a jog." And I jogged north for about 3 miles. It looks so totally different now that I would have a hard time pinpointing exactly where the spot was that he grabbed me. He grabbed me from behind and said to me, "We're going to go for a little walk up into the sand dunes." It was a fairly deserted area of the beach. There wasn't anyone visible. 2 thoughts went instantly through my mind. I need to stay calm. I need to get a really good look at this guy, because if I survive this, I want to be able to identify him. He was kneeling over me, telling me to spread my legs. And the more I refused, the more frustrated he became. and he tightened his grip and said, "Do what I tell you, I've got a knife." I didn't see the knife, but when he told me, "I've got a knife," I focused on his jacket. I'm thinking, he must have it hidden. It must be in one of his pockets. He would strangle me until I would about lose consciousness. Then he would loosen his grip and say, "Now are you going to do it?" I would refuse, and then he would repeat the strangulation. With his hands around my neck, he started shaking my upper body fairly violently. Then he started beating me about the face. I distinctly remember three thoughts. That our son had hopped on his bike that morning, and I hadn't kissed him goodbye and told him I loved him, and I would never have that chance again. That our daughter was with us at the beach, and her last vision would be of my dead, strangled body lying naked in the sand. And my third thought was that now my husband was going to have to raise 2 young children on his own. Eventually, he strangled me until I lost consciousness. When I came to, I sat up, I looked at my hands, and they were covered with blood. I'm thinking, he could have left on a trail through the woods. Maybe he's in the woods waiting to see if he in fact killed me. I need to get out of here. I need to get to safety. The first person who questioned me in the emergency room was a female deputy from the Mansfield County Sheriff's Department. She asked me to give a physical description of my assailant. I said that he had scraggly beard and mustache. His hair was frizzy from the humidity and sort of blended with the texture of his beard. I described it either as sandy blonde or dirty blonde hair. Brown eyes, about 5'6" to 5 feet 8 inches tall. Short, stubby fingers, very strong hands, wearing a brown t-shirt, Caucasian male. I said to the sheriff, "Do you have a suspect in mind?" And he answered yes. He put 9 photos in 3 groups of 3 on my bedside table, asked me to look carefully at the photos to determine whether or not my assailant was among them. Eventually, I picked up Stephen Avery's photo and handed it to the sheriff, and I said, "This is the guy." He put together a live lineup to make sure that we have the right person in custody. And I start at number 1, and I'm looking carefully at each one. And when I came to number 6, I felt the color drain from my face, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I marked on the piece of paper, number 6, folded in half, and gave it to the sheriff. The verdict came in the middle of the afternoon. When the jury filed in, I felt like you could hear my heartbeat across the entire courtroom. I was so nervous. Steve had been charged with attempted first-degree murder, first-degree sexual assault, and false imprisonment. As the verdict was read, he was found guilty on all 3 counts. Steve went through a number of appeals, maintaining he was innocent. All his appeals were turned down. In 2001, one of his appellate attorneys contacted the Wisconsin Innocence Project. There were a number of hairs that had been recovered when I was taken to the hospital. His motion was to have those hairs tested for DNA. I'm like, I know the right guy's in prison. Let's get this over with. It took from April of 2001 until September of 2003 for the DNA to be tested and the results to come back. I get a phone call. I had identified the wrong person. Stephen Avery was not my assailant. Still pretty fresh, remembering what that felt like. It was much harder than the day I was assaulted. The day I was assaulted, I felt like there was something I could do about it. I could fight back. I can't unring this bell. I can't give Steve back the 18+ years that he lost. My assailant was, in fact, a man named Gregory Allen. Gregory Allen was free from 1985 until 1995. He was a suspect in between 8 and 10 sexual assaults in those ensuing years. So I had to ask myself, how many other women have had their lives turned inside out and upside down because the wrong person went to prison for my assault? And I played a role in that misidentification. I was following the railroad track across town, and I don't think I really wanted a train to come. I just felt like, oh my God, I don't deserve to live. I have played a role in a horrific, horrific miscarriage of justice. The next week, I saw a picture of Gregory Allen. I looked at that picture and I would have sworn I have never seen this guy in my life. I was having difficulty sleeping, a lot of nightmares. And I always saw Stephen Avery in those nightmares and in those flashbacks. It was his face that I saw. He was the only suspect who was in both the photo array and the live lineup. Once I made that identification, he in fact became my assailant. You can't go back and decontaminate.
Okay, good evening, everyone. We are at the Italian Criminal Justice Festival, and the panel of this evening is dedicated to an extraordinary story. And we are very lucky to have here the producer and the director of this documentary that told this story, and above all, the protagonist, the main protagonist of the documentary. So I'm here to introduce the speaker, and there will be a short debate about the documentary we have just seen, which is Contaminated Memories. And we've seen the documentary live, and then you will find the documentary on the website of the New York Times. So here with us, we have Penny Beernsten, and she's a retired business owner. Following her assault and the crime she suffered, she became involved in the restorative justice movement, speaking frequently to prisoners and criminal justice practitioners as a member of victim impact panels. Then we have a good friend of mine. She's Debra Tolchinsky, and she's a documentary director and producer and a multimedia artist, a curator, and an associate professor at the Northwestern University. We had the pleasure to have Debra a couple of years ago in Rome with us, and she spoke about this documentary to the law students of Professor Luparia, and this was a very important moment. So I don't want to waste time because we are kind of short, because with the online events we have the clock is ticking, and so I will let our speakers start. But before this, let me introduce two young law practitioners that we are happy to work with, and that at the end of the discussion will interview Penny. And their name are Federica Fedorczyk, and she's a lawyer, a criminal lawyer, and a PhD student. And then there is Chiara Greco, and Chiara is a trainee judge, and she's also a PhD student. So on behalf of the staff of the Criminal Justice Festival, I welcome you, and I will let Penny shortly talk about her extraordinary and in a way quite tragic story. So I will let Ms. Beernsten speak.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for including me in this criminal justice forum that you're undertaking in Italy. It's an honor to be part of it, and without Deb's film, I would pretty much be unknown to you. So it's a great honor to be part of trying to improve the criminal justice system. I think the film adequately covered the assault itself. So I would like to just re-emphasize some of the points that were brought out and maybe add a few additional points regarding the identification process itself. When I was in the emergency room at the hospital following the assault, I gave a description of my assailant to a female deputy. Now, the female deputy immediately thought of Stephen Avery. Stephen Avery was out on bail awaiting trial for attempting to assault a sheriff's deputy's wife at rifle point. So I gave a description that sounded like Stephen, and Judy, the deputy, immediately thought of him. Now, one of the wife of the deputy who was assaulted was the best friend of Judy, the female deputy taking my statement. So wrongful convictions are often the cause of misidentifications, but there's a lot of factors that go into the misidentification. Following that description, when I was taken to my hospital room, I then gave a more detailed description to a police artist who produced a composite sketch. So I had my original memory of of my assailant. Then with the completion of the sketch, I was shown the sketch. So then I had the memory of the sketch. I had that in my mind. And I said to the sheriff who was present for this drawing, do you have a suspect in mind? He indicated yes. And then he immediately put 9 photographs in 3 rows of 3 on my bedside table and asked me to look carefully at each one and see if my assailant was among them. I did that, and I picked Stephen Avery's photo and handed it to the sheriff. 2 days after I was released from the hospital, I received an obscene phone call from from an unknown person who knew some of the details of the crime, but nothing that he couldn't have gleaned from newspaper reports. However, I called the sheriff's department and reported this obscene phone call, and he put together a live lineup to, quote, make sure we have the right person in custody. Stephen Avery had been arrested about 8 hours after I was assaulted, so maybe just a couple hours after I had selected his photo. So there would not have been a live lineup if I had not received an obscene phone call. So I was taken to the sheriff's department, and at the live lineup, there were 8 men in the live lineup. I looked carefully at each person, and I selected number 6, who was Stephen Avery. And Stephen Avery was the only person who was in both the live lineup and the photo array. And Gregory Allen, my actual assailant, was in neither. So I think that's important. It was a perpetrator absent lineup. The other thing I'd like to emphasize was that during the assault, my assailant told me that he had a knife. And from that point forward, I began focusing on where he might have the knife. I did not see a knife. He was wearing a leather jacket, and so I looked at that and tried to imagine where he might be hiding the knife. So I focused on the jacket, I focused on the pockets. My goal was to survive, and the pockets in his jacket looked shallow. I'm thinking it can't be real big a knife. How much can I struggle before he pulls it out and starts stabbing me? So at some point, after Steve was arrested, the sheriff's department put together a leather jacket lineup, and there were probably 20 leather jackets on a number of tables. And I was told to look carefully at each one and see if I could identify the jacket. And long story short, I looked at all the jackets and I said, I do not believe that the jacket my assailant was wearing is in this lineup. Stephen Avery owned only 1 leather jacket. It was not in the lineup. Or if it wasn't in the lineup, I failed to identify it. Now that should have been exculpatory evidence, and it should have been turned over to the prosecutor, to the defense team, and I don't believe that it was. Another factor that happened early on, but that I did not know about until the exoneration, was that the police department, which did not have jurisdiction, called me and said they had another suspect in mind. And they asked me questions. Had I ever noticed anybody following me on my jogging route? Had I ever noticed anybody standing at the back of the gymnasium where I taught fitness classes at the YMCA? And I answered in the negative to all these questions. But I called the sheriff's department and said, I just got a call about another suspect. What's going on here? And they said, we'll check it out. I called back a week later and said, did you check on this other suspect? And they said, we've got our man. Do not worry about it. The police department doesn't have jurisdiction. Again, after the exoneration, I found out that the Manitowoc Police Department was very concerned about Gregory Allen, my actual assailant. They were so concerned that on, I think about 2 weeks before I was assaulted, they were conducting daily surveillance on Gregory Allen. He had attempted to assault another woman on the same beach where I was attacked, and but he was not convicted. And he was becoming increasingly violent. So they had daily surveillance. They checked on him as often as 10 times a day over a 2-week period. On the day I was assaulted, because of a large volume of police calls, they were not able to check on him except in the morning, and that afternoon I was assaulted. I had almost completely forgotten about that until the exoneration, and then it became apparent after the exoneration that unfortunately they had dismissed, the sheriff's department had dismissed the information from the police department. And this is very common where police jurisdictions do not cooperate with one another. And then just a little bit about my healing journey. Shortly after Steve was convicted and sent to prison, I heard about restorative justice and victim offender mediation. And I wanted to meet with Steve because I felt he was the only one who had answers to some of my questions. However, one of the ground rules of victim offender dialogue is that the perpetrator accept responsibility for the crime. And of course, Steve was maintaining his innocence, and so it was not possible to meet with him. However, I became trained as a facilitator in victim offender conferencing, and I started speaking on victim impact panels, feeling as if I would go into prisons and speak to inmates and hope that if they could understand the impact of their crime on their particular victim, they might be able to begin to feel empathy for that victim. And one of the things I always said to the men in prison is, when you make a mistake, you admit it, you take responsibility, and you try to repair the harm. And as we get into some of the question and answers, I think the importance of restorative justice in my life and in my ability to move forward will become more apparent. I also wanted to mention that when Steve was exonerated, I was able to meet with him. I initially wrote him an apology letter. And I remember when I finished writing that letter, I said to him, you know, I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope that you're able to move forward and put your life back together and have a good life from this point outward. And this point forward, I remember feeling how inadequate those words were. And a song went through my head, the lyrics from a Simon and Garfunkel song, Homeward Bound. And all my words come back to me in shades of mediocrity. Because how do you apologize to someone for playing a role in taking away 18 years of their freedom? And as we get into the question and answer period, again, I believe that I can share a little bit of my journey on how I have now come to understand that Stephen Avery and I were both victims of a flawed system, and we were both victims of Gregory Allen, who let an innocent man languish in prison for 18 years for a crime he did not commit. So I will end my remarks here, and I look forward to the Q&A period to follow.
Thank you, Penny. And Debra, now it's your turn. I mean, we are starting from your documentary, and I would like I would ask you to speak about it to the Italian people and why you decided to tell about this story and to do this work.
Okay, I'll be fairly brief because you've seen the film already. First, I want to thank the Italian Criminal Justice Festival for hosting me and sharing my film and having Penny and I come. And I particularly want to thank you, Martina, and Luca. And I'm scared I'll pronounce his name wrong, but Lupari.
It's Lupari, yes.
Okay, I didn't totally mess it up.
Your Italian is perfect.
Okay. And really, I want to thank Penny. I know you want me to talk about the film, but I want to thank Penny because something that she hinted at, you know, you asked why I started making this film, and I hadn't intended to make this film. I heard Penny speak at a symposium for wrongful conviction, and I was so moved by her story, I could not shake it. And I think it's important to say that her willingness to talk about this story, the vulnerability of the story, you know, to admit publicly, you know, to make a film about the fact that you've made a mistake. Wow, I mean, the bravery, it's really incredible and rare and important, because we cannot create better systems, we cannot evolve unless we look at the mistakes we make and figure out how to do better. And that is really why I wanted to make this film, because I think it can be used in this way. And as you know, Martina, it's part of a feature film. It's just a small piece. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but it's not the entire thing that I'll be covering. I'll be going into much more detail. But what Penny has done is what I believe police departments and the criminal justice system in general, especially in the United States, need to do more of. They need to be able to admit when mistakes are made and have the bravery to do that instead of digging in their heels and refusing to evolve and use those mistakes to make things better. And I will also say that, yes, Penny made a mistake, but her mistake was really grief. I mean, she was led to make that mistake. It wouldn't have happened if better protocols were put into place, what happened was the result of really bad protocols. And it makes it so that these things happen. It's always hard to talk to like a wall, you know, because I can't see anybody. So I'm envisioning you all. But the other thing that I would just like to say is that, you know, the project was inspired by hearing Penny speak. And of course, I, like so many women, have also experienced attempted assault, have had sexual harassment, and could easily see myself in Penny's situation and wondered, what would I be able to remember? What could I pick someone out of a police lineup? What do I recall now? And after spending a day on the beach with Penny filming, it was funny, like this memory of an attempted assault on a deserted beach came back to me, and I hadn't had that in my mind. But when I think about it, I don't think I would have been able to pick that person out of a police lineup, even right afterwards. And what Penny referred to in her opening about the leather jacket, she went into a lot of detail about that. And I'm not a memory expert, but I've been steeped in this research for 5 years. I started this work in 2015 with Penny. Is referred to as the weapon focus effect. If you're in a intense situation, they call it weapon focus, and someone says something like, or they have a gun, or they say they have a knife, you focus on that. He said he had a knife, she focused on the leather jacket and remembered, you know, little details exactly about that jacket, but other things go a little bit hazy. And people who study memory, like Elizabeth Loftus, who is in my feature film, could talk on that a lot more. The last thing that I guess I want to say, you know, is that this short is part of a longer piece. It's just a piece of Penny's story, and the feature is called True Memories and Other Falsehood. It's in co-production with Kartemkin Films. I am in the editing stage now, and it kind of looks at this idea of contamination from multiple perspectives. From the perspective of an eyewitness, how does it happen that your memory becomes contaminated? It looks at it from the perspective of the suspect. I have an amazing person named Gary Gauger in the film, who police convinced he murdered his parents, and he was sentenced to death by lethal injection. He did not murder his parents, and luckily the truth came out after he was in prison for 3 years. But how does that happen, that you could be convinced of such things? And you know, when you hear that, you think, no way. But now that I've done the research and talked to people, I get it. I totally get it. And we are all so much more susceptible. And then I have a man in my film named Guy Miles, who spent 20 years in prison for an armed robbery. And it was also, he was identified in a photo lineup, and he did not commit that crime. And I'm looking at the way not only investigators or police contaminate memory, but how, as a society, all of our memories, as a people, how we are all contaminated by bias, and specifically, in his case, racial bias, how a crime could be mapped onto him. So it's really a much more entrenched type of contamination is racism, and how that impacts the entire criminal justice system. And I know that's not just in the US. And the film will also, I also have incorporated a retired policeman, but as a police homicide detective, he elicited a false confession. And he talks about that and how it led him to try to create change within the system, and the blowback that he got for that. And again, this is part of the problem. If we're not allowed to look at mistakes, and that's why films like this, I think, can be useful, and think about what was wrong. How do you move forward? And he tried to make changes, and he was threatened. He was punished by supervisors and ultimately retired early. And I also have a policeman who is a homicide detective in Arizona who is trying to create new curriculum that maybe is more in line with what you're doing in Europe, that is not based on the Reed technique, but to create protocols that would prevent a lot of the mistakes that have happened. So I'll stop here and let you go forward.
Thank you. Yeah, we could. I mean, we could go on for hours on these issues, and starting from what happened to Penny, we could go on for hours, but unfortunately we have a short time. So, but I hope that Italian people who will see this frame, this panel, will decide to know more, to go deeper, and because this is an extremely important topic that is international. I mean, it's global. So it's not an American problem. It's not an Italian problem. I think, and I'm afraid that also in Taiwan or in China, these things could happen. So this is why it is important to talk. So I will leave Federica and Chiara start the question and answers.
Thank you, Martina. Hi, nice to meet you. It's a pleasure to be here with you. We will start with a few questions. The title of your story is Contaminated Memories. We know that often victims' memories, due to the trauma they have experienced, may not accurately remember all the details. But at the same time, from a legal standpoint, it is one of the key pieces of evidence. Victims' ability to provide accurate testimony is considered very important, both in the investigation and in the trial. However, there is a gap between what the human mind is actually capable of and what the legal system requires, which is a high consistency and precision, but of course cannot always be present. Do you think that the legal system, and especially the people who work in it, are aware of this inherent complexity? And what do you think would have been the best way to reconstruct the memory of your trauma?
it's a very complicated question. I do not believe that I believe much of the legal system is unaware of the complexity and unaware of the way memory works and how memory is contaminated. So I think that's the importance of training for anyone involved in the criminal justice system. And I'm excited to see that much of that training is beginning in law schools, so that new attorneys will at least have some background in why wrongful convictions occur. And the short answer to the second question is that there is no way to reconstruct a memory. That once a memory is contaminated, it's pretty much contaminated forever, especially in terms of eyewitness identification. So the key is to try and through proper procedures and best practices to try and prevent that contamination from occurring. And an example I use sometimes, and I know this is not a scientific example but I had the original memory of my assailant in my mind. Then I gave a description to a police artist who showed me his finished product, the drawing. So then I had that memory, and if you think of each little piece of memory as like a thread, so then those two threads become intertwined. Then I select Steve's photo from a photo array, and so I have that image. That's the third thread, becomes intertwined. And then because of the obscene phone call, they put together a live lineup, and I picked Steve's photo. I picked Steve out of the live lineup, which was a natural thing to do since I had seen his photo and he was the only one in both lineups. But once those memories are contaminated, then you can't go back and pull out the individual strands to get back to what was my original memory. So that's why the best practices are so important. It won't, but there's also, I remember Gary Wells, sometimes the law enforcement is trying to be sensitive, but they need to get information quickly following a crime. So they question a victim who's still in the initial stages of trauma and shock. And Gary Wells, a memory expert, has stated that that's important because he said memory doesn't decline gradually. He said it falls off a cliff. And I think it was Elizabeth Loftus who said memory is born anew every day. One of the important things that did not occur in my case is after I made my identification, I was not asked, how certain are you that you've identified the correct person? And I know one of your subsequent questions is about the ID process. That's very important to ask a victim when he or she makes that initial identification, because events post-crime, things you learn, etc., can contaminate that memory further. So I don't know, Deb, if you want to add anything on memory.
Well, there's so much to add, but that's in a way why I'm making this film, is because I think it's important for it to get out there. The more aware we all are, and of course this is implicated in the big, where it has huge consequences, where someone is put in prison. But all of us in our daily lives and the way we live, being sensitive and aware and realizing that our memories are not this thing that is like, absolute and we remember everything and it's all static. It continues to evolve and it will continue to evolve. So it's not, we all need to be aware of that when we live our lives, but especially with justice. And I think the more that we can, make people aware of that, the less arrogant we all are. And the less types of mistakes will get made by jurors, by judges, by witnesses, so that's really why I'm making the film.
Thank you.
Thank you. And moving to a more technical question, at the moment of the first identification, after you choose every picture, The police did confirm or comment your choice, and when after you did the second identification in the physical line, there was a barrier or a mirror or something between you and the suspect, and in that occasion, have you received any kind of suggestion or comment by the police?
Excellent question. Following following my selection of Steve as in the photo lineup, the police or the sheriff confirmed that this suspect they had in mind. And there was, when I went to the live lineup, there was a physical barrier. There was a one-way mirror between the suspects and myself, or between the man in the lineup and myself. And after I made my selection, when I went back to the sheriff's office, he confirmed that I had selected the person whose photo I had selected, who had been arrested. So in other words, the suspect was in custody. So it again received back that I had selected the person that they believed had committed the crime.
Okay, so they confirmed your choice. Thank you.
Yes, yes, they did. The live lineup, which Deb actually included in her, if you look at it, it was a pretty bad lineup. There were men who were considerably taller than I had described my assailant. There were men who I felt did not look anything like the suspect, or like my description of the suspect. And I asked the sheriff about it, and this is actually accurate and on his part. It was very difficult in a small community to find men who matched my description to put in the lineup. So again, they rarely do live lineups now. And oftentimes they can do photo lineups with computer photos. So the technology has greatly improved since 1985.
Yeah, Penny, I remember you talking about the mailman, sticking him in the lineup because he had a beard. It was very difficult at that time to find someone else with a beard, and that they just pulled whoever had a beard into the lineup. So, you know, the idea of fillers and who is in a filler and who can be slid in as a suspect is just, it's so important. And, you know, we've kind of talked around this. I know you're not asking me this question, but I want to just underscore that it is, I think it's implied with the film and with what Penny has said, but you do not follow a photo lineup with a live lineup with only one person who is the same in both those lineups. That's a contamination, and that is considered an incredibly bad practice. That is not allowed in many jurisdictions now. However, in the US, one of the problems is it's like the Wild West, and we don't have an overarching system where it's the same everywhere. So although it's considered a bad practice and not allowed, there are maybe some jurisdictions that still do it and don't realize it's a bad practice.
Yeah, it's true.
So
Okay.
thank you very much to Penny and Debra for your answers. My next question will be linked to what we were just talking about. I was wondering what, in your opinion, were the factors that contributed to Penny's misidentification, especially considering that, as we have seen in the documentary, Penny was trying to grasp as many details as she could during the attack. So she was indeed paying attention as a victim. So yes, a list of what you believe were the factors of Penny's mistake.
Well, I believe the reason I stated at the trial that I was absolutely positive I had identified the right person was that my confidence grew over time. I was not asked at the time I made my identification, how certain are you that you've identified the right man? So I did not give a statement of certainty at the time of the crime. Excuse me. And then, let's see, 4.5, 5 months later at trial, I was asked how certain I was, and that's when I made the statement that I was absolutely certain. I received, and the grew over time in that 5-month period because of information I received about Stephen Avery between the time I identified him and the time I was testifying in court. Initially, the sheriff confirmed that I had picked the suspect that they had in mind. And then I was given a lot of information from the sheriff's department about Stephen Avery's background. He had a juvenile record. Much of that record was fairly innocuous property crimes, breaking into a vending machine and stealing the quarters, breaking into somewhere else and stealing a couple 6-packs of beers, not very serious. However, there was the serious charge of he set a cat, he doused a cat with kerosene and threw it into a fire, so cruelty to animals. I learned that he had tied a dog to the back fender of a car and driven off, was dead. I learned that cruelty to animals is often predictive of violence against women. I was told that he abused his wife. So there were a lot of information that the sheriff's department was very willing to share with me that made me feel like, wow, my identification, you know, helped get a very dangerous person off the street.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know if there was part of your question I didn't answer.
Yeah.
But that's why it's so crucial to ask someone at the time of identification.
Yeah, well, I would say,
Thank you very much.
Penny had the experience and she can really answer it from a first person, you know, pulling back a little bit and looking at other cases and the system, you know, the things that come to mind. Well, in Penny's case, you know, the way the photo lineup, protocols around the photo lineup, possibly even before that, protocols around the criminal sketch that was drawn. And I don't want to get into detail about that because I don't know what's okay to talk about, but it may be that that sketch was drawn with someone who had seen a picture. We'll never know, but there is some information to indicate that. So confirmation bias for sure on the part of the deputies and the investigators, suggestive questioning where you question in a way that provokes certain kinds of answers, not following through, as Penny has talked about, with other leads, being sure that you have someone before you've really conducted a complete investigation. These are part of the problems, but they also come back and influence someone's memory and the way that you're looking at your own experience. Post-event information for sure, stuff that Penny was told and that she became aware of, such as the burning of the cat, you know, such as, you know, spousal abuse, for sure are going to influence what you think. And then one thing that wasn't talked about, and this is far along, but witness coaching, how witnesses are coached. If you were to say, you know, how sure are you and what you're coached to say in order to get a conviction. So one of the biggest problems is this emphasis on getting convictions versus getting at truth. And once you have like someone in your target, like you think this is it, everything kind of gets piled on to try and get to that end, as opposed to the goal being truth. And it's a real big problem. And in the US, you know, when police departments are sometimes evaluated based on those convictions, it's even worse. But even though that's not directly how your memory becomes contaminated, it's all connected because it has to do with the way the process unfolds.
Thank you very much. And this brings me to my next question, which is directly at Debra, since you've told us that you've spent the past 5 years studying the issue of contaminated memory and wrongful conviction. So if you give 3 pieces of advice to a judge or a prosecutor or a police officer to avoid miscarriages of justice, what would those pieces of advice be?
Boy, Penny can help me with that. It's a huge issue, and there's so many things. One of the things that I think are the deceptive, and this is like keeps coming up to me, are the deceptive practices that are used, that are allowed. And this is a US problem, that police are allowed to be deceptive. And the idea is someone innocent would never confess, so you can tell, you know, whatever. So I think getting rid of deception, making that not allowed. You can't tell someone you have evidence against them when you don't. You can't tell them you have evidence of a bloody knife that shows you killed your parents when you don't. Because really the people being interrogated, the most vulnerable are people that trust the police. And they're taken advantage of, or people that are young, or people that don't have knowledge. I think people should not be questioned without lawyers. You should not be able to waive your Miranda rights. I think it's used in a way to make the most vulnerable people, you know, suspects. But you're asking particularly about contamination of memory. You know, like Penny had said, I think questioning people as soon after an event. I think the questions and the initial description should be videotaped, and from beginning to end, not just the pieces that you want to get a conviction. I don't understand in this day and age why it isn't, and that should be used. So I would say videotaping. I have a whole list of things, but that would really be on the top. Penny, do you think of other things?
One of the things I think about when they're doing a lineup with victims, I mentioned asking them afterwards how certain they are, but giving instructions beforehand, assuring the victim that if they not select anyone from a lineup, that the investigation will continue. As Deb alluded to, oftentimes people aren't aware of how the criminal system works. It's not like it worked when you watch shows on TV. And so a victim needs the reassurance that investigations will continue regardless of whether or not you make an identification. And another thing that's recommended in best practices is that the photo or lineup be administered in a double-blind, like a double-blind medical trial in a sense, to draw that analogy, so that the person, the investigator who has questioned the victim is not the one administering the lineup, so that he or she is not even unconsciously giving any nonverbal clues, giving any feedback. And I think sometimes feedback is given to try and reassure a traumatized victim. Oh, you did a good job. So it's not always that there's a malicious intent, but it can have very dire consequences if a victim is steered in a particular direction. One of the best practices recommendations is always that it be done in a double-blind fashion.
Yeah, and I would just add, you know, establishing best practices that incorporate in cognitive science, you know, in many ways, not just the police lineup, but for sure the police lineup, but also mandating training regarding confirmation bias, suggestive questioning, and memory and belief contamination, and changing the way police departments are evaluated. All those things would be a huge help.
Thank you. The next question is for Penny. When the miscarriage of justice was discovered, did you experience any repercussion or threats or in general any recrimination from the people you knew or even from strangers? And did you feel that people at the end had forgotten that you were too a victim?
Absolutely. To answer your second question first, absolutely. I think, and as I've met other victims in wrongful conviction cases, this has been a universal experience that the tables get and the victim is viewed as the perpetrator and is pretty much forgotten. They're viewed as the cause of the wrongful conviction. The reason I'm not on social media is there was so much recrimination, especially in the couple of years after the exoneration, when a documentary film came out about my role in it. People suggested I should commit suicide, and even on a less, and I know that's so commonplace nowadays that there's just kind of no limits to what people will say on social media because they can often be anonymous. But I think that, again, people don't understand how a wrongful conviction occurs. And I don't know that I would understand if I hadn't been part of one, because friends would say to me, like, you looked at him for 15 minutes. How could you forget the face of the man who terrorized you? People would say, why didn't you run faster? Well, I was running in the sand and I was on mile 6 of a long run through the sand. If I could have run faster, I would have. And so there were a lot of just kind of off the wall comments. And I think many of those comments, unfortunately, were from women. And I think it's almost a defense mechanism for other women to feel vulnerable and feel like I would have run faster. I would have, looked at him more carefully. So I don't even think there's always malicious intent. And sometimes I think people don't know what to say. And so they say the wrong thing. But there were definite recriminations. The original victim in an exoneration is often considered part of the failed prosecution process. And they often become the sacrificial lambs for a system that has made errors and a system that doesn't like to admit error. So I know the sheriff's department's comment was, well, we had such a confident victim. Well, yes, you did, but why was I confident? What was the process that led to my confidence? And I think if you think logically about it, no survivor of assault wants the wrong person to go to prison. I had 2 young children. I was getting obscene phone calls that I thought, and it well could have been from my actual perpetrator. It could have been from Gregory Allen. So I was concerned not only for my safety, but the safety of my children. And this, again, has been a universal experience in other women I've talked to involved in wrongful convictions. They all wanted the right person to go to prison. They all felt tremendous guilt over their error and wished that turned back the clock. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much. I think that we are running out of time, so I will thank you, and thank you especially, if I may, Penny, because Please, where are you? In Arizona, in the middle of nothing, and you succeeded in connecting with us. So yeah, you were very nice.
Well, thank you for including me. And I just want to make one quick, there was one question that didn't get asked about if there's support groups. And I know
Yes.
Jennifer Thompson from Justice is another one of your presenters.
Yeah.
And she, as far as I know, she runs the only groups for victims who have been involved in wrongful conviction. Also works with exonerees and brings us all together. And I think it's so important for exonerees and victims to work together to understand that we've all been harmed. That harm has been apples and oranges sort of thing, but there's strength in numbers and in working together. And there's huge value in films like Deb's to try and make systemic changes so that wrongful convictions hopefully become pretty much a distant memory.
Yeah,
So thank
exactly.
you very much for including me. And
yeah, we had this afternoon Jennifer Thompson, and we had about her story, and yes, it is amazing for me. I was thinking the other day that it's quite shocking for me to personally know now, also for you, Penny, two women that experienced the same tragedy. I mean, to be raped, to be victim of such a horrible crime, and then you had the victim twice to another tragedy that was to pick up the wrong man, and so it is quite. I mean, for the work I do for my job, maybe yes, I'm not a good. I mean, a good sample for the percentage, but it's shocking for me to think about that there are not one isolated story, but there are actually many women, several women that experience this tragedy, and healing justice is helping these women to come through. And so this is extremely important, the work that Jennifer does, and I also know that you, Penny, are part of the project. I don't know if Federica and Chiara want to comment, to add anything before we stop.
Oh, thank you, Martina. I just wanted to thank you very deeply, both Debra and Penny, as I assume, especially for Penny. It's not easy to talk about this. So thank you very much for your words.
Yeah, and I just want to thank you all and underscore that for Penny, it's not just talking about it like on panels. She's put herself out there in a film, which makes her, as you know, indicated, vulnerable in terms of social media and the stupid things that uninformed people will say. And despite that, she has done that in order to, you know, try and make the process evolve and get better so that these type of mistakes don't happen. And it really takes an amazing person, you know, who is willing to do what she's done for a long time now. So I just want to thank her for being willing to, you know, come to this panel, to participate in things connected with my project in the film. And I hope that it is not just used as an extractive, sensationalist, you know, entertainment, but it's actually used to create real change that prevents other people from having to go through these type of experiences from all ends.
Yeah. So thank you very much, and have a nice day.
Okay, have a good evening.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I'm Tiziano Hughes and I'm 67. First question. as it is very hard to stand being convicted and jailed for years as innocent. What are the main feelings in these situations? Hatred, desire of revenge, loss of hope, resignation, or oblivion?
So, to answer your question, yes, it was very hard to be in prison for a crime I didn't commit. You just feel like you have no one or nothing, knowing that you didn't do a crime, and yet you're sitting behind these bars, taken away from all your family, from your children, from your parents, from your friends. It's a very hard situation to have to endure. There were so many times when I felt just so in despair of not knowing what I was going to do or how I was going to make it through this time, not knowing if I was ever going to come home. Yeah, I would have to say it was a very hard time, but I found my faith even stronger being in a situation that I was in, and I couldn't lose hope. That's all I had in there. I had hope and my faith in God, and I just could not lose my trust. I'm not saying that there weren't times that I did feel like I had no one, but God was with me through this whole time. And thank God for OIP and for Mark Gotzi and all the law students who also just took the time to give me some hope back and, to help me to be free again. And has this experience changed me? Absolutely. I've lost a lot of trust in the justice system. I just cannot believe how much they had failed me, that they didn't care, that nothing happened, that they just wanted anybody or anything. They wanted this case to be true, and it wasn't. And so to trust the justice system, I have no faith in them ever again. I will never trust the justice system. And I think that's sad. I think it's sad that it's changed me in that way, because I was always raised to trust in the justice system, that they would always do the right thing by us, and that is what we have them for. But in my case, that wasn't the case. And it makes me sad today that I feel the way I do. I hope that this answers your questions for you. Thank you.
What are your feelings during a wrongful incarceration? Well, first, they're absolute anger, and you're just trying to wonder why this happened and how you're going to get this straightened out and get it turned around, and definitely anger towards the people who've done this to you, which that will never change. But definitely just wonder on how this happened. Wonder what in the world went wrong.
And the other questions are for Ricky. How have the conditions of living inside the prison changed in 40 years? How has the food changed, the activities they were offering you, the relationship between the prisoners, and something more psychological? How have your positivity and optimism changed in 40 years? How has been evolving throughout this extremely long period?
In 1975, when I was initially incarcerated, prisons by and large were self-sustained. They pretty much grew their own food. They slaughtered their own meat. They built furniture. They paved roads. They built the prisons themselves. They did a lot of construction work, and like I said, they were self-contained. And a man that went to prison in those days could actually learn a skill that he could come out and, get a meaningful, a well-paying job with. And the recidivism rate wasn't that high back then. But fast forward, we start allowing the the private industry to come and buy prisons and take up prisons, and they industrialized the prison system, and it became a whole different animal. Guys stopped learning skills and they started being industrialized. It was about bodies and filling beds. It wasn't about educating guys and rehabilitating people anymore. It's about filling beds. And the laws were changed to reflect that during those times of mass incarceration of minority and other people, you know.
How does your experience in prison differ respect the experience of a guilty person?
How did my experience as an innocent person differ from that of a guilty person? I believe that a guilty person knows and understands why they're there, and an innocent person can't figure out how the system completely just made this big mistake and have them in prison for who knows how long for something they had nothing to do with. It's a major difference between an innocent person doing time and a guilty person doing time.
Does knowing that you are victims of injustice and powerless in the face of other people's decision lead you to get closer to religion than you were before to find comfort? Or did it push you away because you were frustrated and angry even with God?
What was the effect of religion on me during my time? I grew up in a Baptist house. My mother was a Sunday school teacher, so we were in church Sunday morning, Sunday evening, Wednesday, visitations on Thursday. So I grew up in a church family, very, very religious. But when I got incarcerated for something I didn't do, I was mad at the world, I was mad at God, I was mad at everybody, I was mad at the blades of grass in the yard. I was mad at everything. So it definitely had an effect at that time.
I have a question for Dean. I have the perception from the pictures about prison that most of the cons consider themselves innocent. Is that at least partially true? And in that case, would you be able, after your experience, to identify them, the true innocent, among all the others?
Yeah.
So the perception of everyone saying they're innocent in prison is not really an accurate statement, because most of the people that are in there definitely know why they're there and understand why they're there. And once they're there, they will quit fighting and hollering that they're innocent and do their time. After a while, you start to recognize people who were innocent, and I've actually have a friend who I helped get out with our project, who when I met him, I could tell he was just as innocent as I was. So yeah, that's a misconception on as far as everyone screaming and hollering they're innocent, because it really is not that way once they're in there doing their time.
Hi. I'm Marco Bordina. I'm an Italian podiatrist, and I'm 32 years old. I want to know if, after so many years in prison, have you ever felt guilty? You know, after so much time that you live in prison, it could happen that you change the point of view about your situation. Thank you.
Hi, Marco. To answer your question, no, I never felt guilty in prison. There was no reason for me to feel guilty. I didn't do anything. The people that did this to me, those are the ones that should feel guilty. They should feel guilty for the 15 years that they took from my life. But as far as me feeling guilty, absolutely not. I did nothing to feel guilty about. Thank you.
After doing so much time, do you ever feel like you are guilty? Never, ever, not for 1 minute ever did I feel like I had ever done anything to even come close to getting this time that I got in prison. I never did anything wrong. I didn't do this crime, and I never ever, and that's one of the things I always said, I never would say I did this crime to get out of prison. I did not commit this crime, and I never would say I did commit the crime.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Irene Catapano. I'm 26 years old and I'm a university student. My first question is about death penalty. I wanted to ask, why is death penalty still used in some of the states? Like, is there a cultural reason behind it?
To a certain extent, I do believe that the death penalty is a phenomenon of the current culture. But it also serves as a reminder to another class of people in this country. And I don't have to make any distinction. We all know who we're talking about. You know, it's primarily a tool of the ruling class to, remind their servants that they are capable of things like this, murder, because that's what it is, murder. By any other name, somebody is still pretty much dead, and those are pretty much my thoughts on that,
My second question is about racism. Could we say that the racial situation in the US is changing, and how? Will it ever be possible to eradicate systemic racism from our society? And what can we normal people do to contribute to this cause?
I mean, it's no surprise that the majority of men and women on America's death rows are primarily brown and black people. You look at the demographics of where the death penalty is employed, and you'll find that's where a number of your death row inmates come from. Will we ever rid ourselves of racism? No, I don't think so. I mean, because to an extent, people are naturally drawn to their own kind. It's we as men who turn it into racism, and there's nothing wrong with people wanting to be with their own kind, but when you put a different spin on it, like mankind has done for so long now, that's when it becomes something different. Sometimes you don't think there's anything we can do, but really, there's a lot we can do. We just have to keep practicing what we believe, because the other side is going to practice what they believe. And if we stop practicing what we believe that it is possible, then we've lost the fight already, and our efforts keep the balance, and that's all we need to do right now is just keep the balance. They'll run out of energy sooner or later, man, because love and positive thinking is going to always outwin the day. We just got to keep on pushing forward like that.
Hello, my name is Paola. I am 57 years old and I'm a manager for an advertising company. I've read your stories and I have a question for you. Did your friends and family always believe you were innocent? Thank you.
Did my friends and family maintain my innocence with me? Yes, they did. My friends and family stuck with me like glue. They stuck with me so strong. No one ever believed that I did this crime, and I was actually with 3 other people when these crimes supposedly happened, so they would have had to have been lying too, and that was not the case. We were all in a different state when these things happened, and so no one ever believed that I had committed these crimes, and that maintained that through my whole time in prison and even after I was out.
Do you recognize the passage of time? Do you count the days, weeks, months as they go by? In Ricky Jackson's video, I noticed that there are no calendars hanging in the cell, nor photos or pictures.
Do you notice the passage of time in prison? And the passage of time in prison is very, very slow. and you notice every minute of it, especially being innocent. It is something you try not to think about, but the days turn into weeks, the weeks turn into months, the months turn into years, and the next thing you know, another one's gone, and it'll drive you crazy if you let it. I definitely don't like the sound of a clock tick-tocking anymore.
The simplest way I can explain it is the movie Groundhog Day with Chevy Chase, I think. And he was cursed to relive the same day over and over again. That's what a typical day in prison is like. The danger lurks around every corner in prison. I mean, everything could seem normal at 1 second, and then chaos erupts the next second. You know, somebody's bleeding, people are yelling, and it's a constant place of high tension at all times, you know. When I was incarcerated back in 1975, I went to the worst prison Ohio had at that time, Lucasville, Supermax. And that's where I was sent. You know, I was 18 years old, you know, and this is what I had to deal with, you know.
Hi, I am Veronica, and I work in the media industry for a beauty company. My first question goes to Nancy. Hi, Nancy. I would like to ask you something about relationships in jail. Did you have the chance to meet anyone that you might call a friend today? Is it possible to support each other in jail with people that you don't actually know? And do you have, because of any interaction with people, any good memory?
In prison, since you share the same experiences and share many of the fears and hopes, is it possible that sincere friendship will form? Do you protect each other and give each other moral support?
Third question. What about the friends you made in jail? Do you still keep in touch? Thank you very much.
Hi, Veronica. So to answer your question, yes, you do make friends in prison. You learn real quick who you want to be friends with and who you don't want to be friends with. I have a lot of friends. As a matter of fact, the one that's recording me right now is one of my friends from prison. She was my bunkie for 4.5 years, and we've always stayed in contact. I have gone up back to the prison to visit some of the girls up there that were my friends that, you know, we lean on each other because you don't have family and you don't have your friends from home. So you learn to, these women become your family, they become your friends. And, you know, we get each other through the holidays and through the birthdays and through the deaths that we might have that have happened while we were incarcerated. So yeah, it's friendship. You can have friends in the prison system and you can have friends outside. As I was saying, the girl that's video on this was my roommate for 4 years, and we are friends, and, you know, we do a lot of things together. You know, we go out and eat. We have other friends out here that we are in contact with also that we go and visit. And, you know, it's just like having a friend that you've always had. That's how they've become. You know, not everybody in prison is a bad person. So, yeah, I would say that, you know, friendship is a big thing inside the prison. Thank you.
Did I make friends while I was in prison? Yes, I did. Most of the people that I was friends with were doing life. Most of them were for murder. Most of those guys were heat of passion crimes, so when they came home, their wife was cheating on them and someone else was in their house, and one or two people were dead. They had a fit of rage and then it was gone. And they were just back to normal. They were just normal people. Bad thing happened. It was no doubt it was a bad thing. But it was, they just lost control. And I feel like they were more normal people than your average everyday criminal that kept coming and going in and out of the prison so many times. It just had a criminal mentality. Was a big difference. And I do visit a couple guys, and I do take phone calls from a few guys and get emails from a few guys through a system that the prison offers for emails. So I do stay in contact with some people, most definitely.
To your second question, yes, I still am friends with a lot of the women in the prison system. The girl that's videoing this is a friend. She was my bunkie for 4.5 years, and she is now home, and we have stayed friends. And we also, you know, you stay in contact with a lot of the women because a lot of them end up being family to you and being friends to you because that's all you have is each other to depend on to get you through, you know, some of the hard times in prison.
Back in the early days of my incarceration, primarily the mid-70s, 80s, and the 90s, prisons were like self-sustained communities. The relationship between the guards and the inmate was not as nearly as fragile and cohesive as it is right now between inmates and guards. You know, a lot of these guys had their children eventually working there at these prisons. I've seen a lot of generations go through some of these prisons. But over the years, when prisons became industrialized, the attitude and optimism in prison started to change because everything became about politics and keeping men in prison longer, you know, serving longer sentences, you know, in order to line the pockets of people who had money invested in privatizing prisons and supplying prisons with all of their dry goods. As for optimism, that, you know, that slowly started to shrink in prisons because people were being used not for why they were in prison, but because they were political pawns, you know. Guys that long past their sentence were still being held in prison, you know, for political reasons.
Hey Dean, this question is for you. I have seen and appreciated your art. The nostalgic feeling is recognizable even for a distance foreigner such as myself. Being a photographer with a keen eye for past and contemporary art, I was wondering what was the beginning of your art project while you were in jail, and what kept the spark of creativity alive while you were incarcerated?
What kept my creativity alive doing my art while I was in prison was the buildings that I was building were places that I thought I would possibly have visited if I was in the free world. And I did a whole series of buildings that were on Route 66, as if I was traveling across America on Route 66, stopping and looking at these beautiful buildings. And I would just put my music on and build these buildings and talk to these buildings, and just everything I was doing was as if I was walking down the street in front of these buildings. And I think that's what really kept it going, because I would do a building and think, well, what was the next one down the road, and do that one. And I think really where my art changed was when I started adding the real look of age and time on my art, where water would splash up on walls and cause the woods to have different colors, and grease around the door handles and things. Those are things that I started really enjoying doing, because it was things that you had to really have an eye for the detail to understand what was going on there. And that kept the creative spark going, to be able to just keep thinking of things that would happen to these buildings over time to add the extra fine detail. And that's what really kept it going, just what was the next thing down the road.
Did this experience leave any positive legacy in your life?
Did this experience leave any positive legacy on my life? I don't see how anything in prison could be positive. If you had to pick something positive out, it would be the fact that my art, the thing that I did in prison to keep my sanity, to keep me going, to keep me motivated, has gained a life of its own, and that's definitely a positive after being featured in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. So if there was any positive about it, that would be a small one.
Hello there, I'm Cami, I'm 25, and I'm a digital media planner for a media agency. You all have very interesting stories, and I'd like to know more. For example, do you think jail time shaped you in any way? Or how did you manage not to be misled by the negative sides of jail?
Did my time in prison shape me in any way? I feel like I was the same guy coming out as I was going in. The things that I did to keep from getting into all the negative bullcrap in prison was art and music. I listened to a lot of music and did artwork, lots of artwork, and actually had a show just featured at the Museum of Modern Art in New York with 5 pieces of mine with some other people who have been in prison. So that has made a difference in my life, but as far as a negative impact, PTSD has definitely been a negative impact from the time in prison, but I don't think anything changed the way I act or do things.
When they acknowledged the error you suffered, was your predominant feeling joy for this liberation or resentment towards the people who ruined part of your life?
So what was my feeling after I was, my conviction was overturned was excitement and fear of what was next and absolute resentment for the people who done this to me, because what was done to me was for personal and political gain only, a vendetta. So it was, I'm still mad at those people, and I will forever be angry at them. But I'm not going to let it affect me and the way I live my life now. So it was joy, but it was also major resentment.
Hi, I am Gargiulo Simone. I am 41 and I am an health and safety manager. How the government pays the victims of wrong imprisonment for the years they spent in jail?
As for compensation and justice for people who have been wrongly convicted and thereafter be exonerated, it varies. But primarily, I think that the atmosphere is just to wish it all away, to make it go away. You hear about these stories more and more, innocent man freed after serving such and such a years, almost every day on the news now. And instead of somebody stepping up and, being responsible for this, I mean, they don't want to give these guys nothing. They just want to make it go away, And the laws vary from state to state. It's not nationwide. Some states, you don't get anything, not even an apology from the legislature and the people who did this to you, So, like I say, it varies, man, It all depends on where you, where your troubles began, so to speak.
Hi, Dean. I saw a very nice picture of you in front of a giant pizza in Rome with one of my dearest friends. And you were very happy and smiling in that picture, and this made me think of how beautiful it could be the first day of release after years spent in jail. And I would like to ask you, which memory do you have of that day or that week? Thank you.
So there was a picture of me in front of a pizza with my dear friend also. Yeah, I was smiling because I was in Italy with my beautiful Martina and my beautiful Pam. And I was eating some of the greatest food that you could possibly eat in the world. To compare to the day that I got out, it would be a close running because I was that excited to be in Rome. And what I remember most about coming home is all the friends that came to visit me the first 3 days I was home. Like I said before, over 600 people come to see me, and to get to see all those people again after 20 years was amazing. And ignite our friendship and carry it on through hopefully the rest of our lives.
Hi, my name is Francesca. I'm 44 years old and I work as head of production in a creative agency in London. I was very touched by the story of Nancy Smith, so my 2 questions are for her. First question. Dear Nancy, you spent 15 years in jail as innocent, and you had to watch your children grow up without your love, and you missed a lot of things of their lives. So how did you manage to never give up? My second question is, since you was a mother who first made the allegation against you, what are your current feelings towards her?
Hi, Francesca. Thank you for the questions. The answer to your first question is that I never lost my love for my children. Being taken away from them, yes, was very, very hard. But thank God that I had the family that I had who brought my children up to see me once a month. I had phone calls, and so I was able to stay connected with my children through phone calls, through visits. I missed a lot of holidays and a lot of birthdays and weddings, but I always was able to go to arts and crafts and buy different things to make for them, to send home for them, to let them know how much I love them and how much I miss them. It was a pretty hard experience to have to go through. And to your second question, it's hard to forgive and to forget, but with my faith, I have learned that I need to move on in my life, and I need to forgive these people for what they've done to me, because I don't want to be miserable or have anger or hatred or hurt in my life anymore. I just want to try to move on and do the best I can to forgive them. I'm not saying that some days it's not hard. I'm saying some days it's easier than it is harder to do that, but I do have to forgive them if I want to move on with my life, but I will never forget what they have done to me. Thank you.
Second question. Do you ever think about how your life would have been if you hadn't been wrongfully committed?
Do I ever think about how my life would have been if I had not been wrongfully convicted? And I think about it every day, and it makes me very mad. But there's nothing I can do about it. There's a lot of things that probably could have come out of my life that would have been fantastic, and it just angers me to no end to think about it. So I try my best not to.
Hi, Cammie. So to answer your first question, how would my life have been if I would never have been in prison? Well, I was engaged to be married, so hopefully I probably would have been married and, just had a normal life, maybe I wouldn't have been married. I really can't say how my life would have been. Hopefully it would have been, married, and, I would have been able to be home to help raise my grandchildren, to be here for my grandchildren when they were born.
Hi, I'm Giulia Spada. I'm 33 years old. I'm an Italian psychotherapist. I want to know which difficulties did you have to cope when you went out of the prison?
which difficulties did I face coming out of prison? And number one would be technology. When I went to prison, no one had a computer in their house. The cell phone were gigantic book bag sized telephones. So learning all the technology on the computer and all the technology that came with the microchip, like the sinks that don't have faucets on them, handles, the toilet or the paper towels that don't have, you just wave your hand, that type of stuff was blew my mind. But definitely the cell phone, the computer, any kind of high-tech equipment, because you don't have none of those training in prison.
Dear Nancy, I would like to ask you how and if these 15 years in jail are affecting the way you're looking at your life today, the way you maybe decide what it's really important to you, what's not, how you really like to spend your time, and maybe the way you decide to do things that you've never done before and you feel like prioritizing today. Thank you.
Hi, Veronica. So to answer the second part of your question, what's important to me today is family and not taking things for granted. Never again will I ever take anything for granted. The most important, like I said, the most important thing is my family and my friends and staying connected with them. As far as doing new things in my life, you know, every day's a new adventure. Being home with just being home alone is a new adventure for me. The first 5 years, I think, was the hardest. The first 5 years of me being home, I think, was the hardest. It affected me the worst. And then just one day I decided that I needed to get a job and to move on with my life. And so that's what I did. And today I'm a dog groomer, something that I never thought I would do, but I love. And I've been doing it for 7 years now. And like I said, as far as new things, I've really traveled a lot with the OIP's conferences. That's something that I probably would maybe never have done. I don't know. I don't know how my life would have been if I wouldn't have done 15 years in prison. But the new experience of going to different states and talking to different people and seminars has also been an experience that I probably wouldn't have done in my life. So I hope that kind of answers that question for you, and thank you.
After experiences the wickedness of people who, out of revenge or without consideration for their actions, sentenced you to prison despite being not guilty. Once you are released from prison, have you returned to trust in others, in people next to you, or have you closed yourself in shell? How did the community where you went to live welcome you? Thank you very much.
How did my time in prison affect my relationships outside of prison as far as trust? When I got home, I only hung around people that I grew up with, people that I've known my whole life, and started out that way, eased into being able to talk to other people that I hadn't met but that were friends with my friends. So I felt if they felt comfortable with them, then I would feel comfortable with them. To the point of now I'll talk to anybody and I don't care. I'll talk to anybody on the street. And I try to look at the good in everybody, except for the people who done this to me. And those people are just devils.
I have a question for Nancy. If you had the chance to talk to your younger self before this all happened, what would you tell yourself to help you to face this experience?
Hi, Lorenzo. Thank you for the question. So that's kind of like a hard question to answer. You know, I guess when you're raised to believe in the justice system, and you move forward in your life as you get older and you take a job, I guess you would never question anything like this happening to you on a job. And so, I mean, I guess if I would have known this was going to happen to me, I would have told myself never to do this. Now I know that I will never, ever have trust in the justice system, but also I will never work or be around anyone else's children because of something like this that has happened to me. The one thing that I can say that helped me get through my prison time was 5 years before this all happened to me, I had started going back to church and I had found my faith again. And I think it prepared me for what I was going to face in prison, and it prepared me to know that my faith I needed to rely and trust more on God and to lean on Him and to let my faith grow stronger as the time went on in the prison system. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Paola. I'm from Italy. I'm 50 years old and I am an import-export employee. I have a question for Mr. Ricky Jackson. How could you bear such an unfair sentence and so many years in prison without going crazy and remaining a normal people?
Paolo, the point is you have to go crazy in order to serve that much time in the various types of prison that I served time in. It's not so much that you go crazy, it's are you able to reel yourself back in? Because in order to endure the brutality that I saw in prison and the barbaricness, you had to be a little crazy. You had to. But again, I reiterate, you had to be able to pull yourself back in. And, you know, I saw some people who couldn't. They went out there too far and they just didn't make it back in.
This question is for Mr. Dean. I know you spent 21 years in jail while innocent because you were charged of 3 rape cases. So once you were released, did this change your relationship with women in any way? So were you scared of dating a woman or starting a romantic relationship with her because of what happened to you?
Did my conviction affect my dating life after I came home? And it had a major effect on it because what I was accused of, actually my friends made sure that anybody who was coming over to the house was someone we've known for a long time. And if I did go out on any dates, it was with some other people to, you know, just to make sure everything was going to be okay. And then finally, after several years, I found the love of my life, who's actually videoing me right now, looking so beautiful.